Regular meeting of the Board of Trustees, 21st, 2021. Please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First off, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming out on short notice, and hopefully we can remain in person from here on out and not go back to anything remotely resembling of the past year. So, first off, the approval of vouchers. Did you guys have a chance to review them? Any questions for the clerk or anything else? Nothing. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Approval of minutes. Let's see, this was for the May 25th. This was a special meeting, right? No, May 25th, 2021, and then we had
The workshop.
the workshop.
I did make that change that you suggested. You may not have that copy though.
Any questions, corrections? If not, I'll take a motion.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Correspondence. Do you want to go into the letter from the New York State Division of Budget regarding the American Rescue Plan Act? Or would you like me to discuss it?
If you want to start it, I can.
So this is the funding that is being put forth, COVID funding from the federal government that we are eligible for certain specific projects here in the village. We need to have it in by, or we need to request the money, or our portion of the money by July 9th? Is that the
July 9th.
all right.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be like a specific amount or for specific needs just yet, just that we would like to engage in the approval process for funds.
There's 4 or 5 specific areas that are eligible for use of this money. We're looking at a couple different avenues right now where we can expend some of it to help some infrastructure projects or some businesses that were impacted or anything like that. Us and Cold Spring, I think, are getting pretty much are eligible for an even amount of money, and Phillipstown is going to get the bulk of it.
Well, actually, it's by population. So Phillipstown will receive approximately $1 million as of the last iteration of how much funds were available, and then it's by population. Since we're 6%, I think, of Phillipstown's overall population, that would be approximately 70,000 over a 2-year period. And then we're not sure exactly when the funds will be available. They're still working that out. The state receives it, then gives it to the municipalities. But we should know more very soon. It's supposed to be decided by the summer, by July, I think. So pretty soon we will know. They're also still working out kind of who's responsible for giving what funds. So, eligible uses are for businesses, nonprofits, individuals, like Mike said. So we would want to coordinate with our other municipalities to see who would be responsible for those things. And those are still things that are being worked out in the details of the regulations.
But just to be clear, it's not a blank check that we can use for anything. So.
Right.
Do you know, or has there been anything about when we have to decide what the money will be used for, and what sort of approval process is for that?
I mean, we have a few years to spend it till 2024, I think it was.
Yeah, they must be. General funds must be spent by December 31st, 2024. Contract funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024 and spent by December 31st, 2026. And funding can be used for eligible costs beginning on March 3rd.
Right, and it's going to be more prospective than prospective. I'm assuming that's because there are a lot of government programs that were available for folks who needed it on a prospective basis. Or past, rather.
Anything else on that?
But hope to have more details in the next meeting.
Two other short or one lengthy thing of correspondence that I guess we'll put off till the STR discussion. We received a letter from Ethan Tim about the short-term rental law. The other one was from Holly Metzer regarding the right-of-way of Gatehouse Road and upkeep of the grass there. So I'm asking Bill to look into who's actually responsible to maintain that right-of-way.
Private road.
Is it private?
Gatehouse Road is.
Yeah, but I don't know if this section down the
It
bottom.
ends just past where Chet is. We're right across from where John Dugan got his driveway put in. After that, like, it's all private.
Okay. Well, Bill's going to pull the records of it so that we have a clear determination of who's responsible for what. And if it's private, then they need to cut the right-of-way down so that it's not overgrown and producing vermin and all that great stuff.
Adamson did it last time. He chopped it all up real nice.
Ed Cleary used to upkeep it, according to Holly. Yeah, so it's been kind of left to grow. Reports. Does anyone have anything they want to discuss?
We've got to just discuss.
Yeah, I mean, anything that I know you were working with Jerry Allen today.
He came in, cut the trees on Division. Across the street in there. Was he in there? Was it across the
I
street?
don't think he cut
He
those
did
yet.
cut it, but I could see one light, but I could see the two lights. I don't know if they
The
were.
one was still on though this afternoon, so
Oh, yeah.
they got to go in and
Trim
trim it back
And
more.
they did the ones up by your house.
Yeah, they did the
Oh,
one,
great.
the one there.
That was down really low.
Yeah, those were done. The ones down on Division Street, they were all over the place today.
He did 3 places he went down.
Okay. Anything
He cut
else?
them up. No, that's. We got done that much. Got that done.
Good. Progress. Anything? No.
Just quick thing, the
Yep.
update from today. So there appears to be an infected hemlock on just outside of Secor in the Nelsonville Woods. So I did contact Ian Kingsley, and he's coming. Somebody is coming tomorrow at 9:30 to take a look at it. Heidi and I will be there, so she can point out the tree, and we'll just take it from there and see what he recommends doing. Whether it is in fact sort of try to diagnose what it is and what the course of action should be.
Okay. Thank you.
One quick little update on our
Yep. Go for it.
the Phillipstown Garden Club had reached out to us about doing some cleanup work on our little village green across the street here, and they're trying to coordinate when a good timing would be for their club members, and we're hoping for a spring cleanup, which is now summer, but it looks like they would not be available till fall now, so we'll have to reassess if volunteers will be able to get to it earlier than that.
Well, in the meantime, the flowers look great over there. Thank you for doing that. And thank you to Frank and his wife or partner for
Thank
helping
them.
out over there.
Yep. And then also a plug for our beautiful pollinator garden that Heidi and Joe have spent so much time on.
Yes.
It's a work in progress. She's still working on it.
And we will hopefully get together an organization of some sort to have some volunteers help out with watering and or weeding or whatnot for both garden areas. It is a big task for one person. Yeah. But thank you very much, Heidi, and to Joe for putting all that effort into creating that. And today marked Pollinator Week, right?
That's right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Before we move on, I want to give you the floor for a second because I'm sorry I made you wait. I forgot you were even there. And you want to tell us a little bit about...
It's right on.
It's great. It's right in the middle of our correspondence report, so it fits.
For all of you that don't know me, I am Dale Cusack. I am the chairman of the Putnam County Joint Veterans Council. And I was part of bringing last year's Memorial Day convoy through the county. And as part of that, because of what Nelsonville did to help us get it all arranged, I have a certificate here.
Thank you very much.
For appreciation of everything that you did to help us get it together. And I'm not saying we will never do it again, but it was a lot of work and it's not going to be anytime soon.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Thank you.
What I will tell you is if you're around in September of 2022, as you know, you may or may not know that we've had the wall in 4 times.
The Vietnam
The
War.
Vietnam
Yes.
Memorial War. It will be here for a 5th time, September 21st to 25th of 2022, along with a new added piece that represents panels for every war that occurred in the 20th century. And we've also obtained having a replica of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in at the same time.
Great.
So
And this will be at the park in Carmel.
it'll be at the park. Well, it's actually in the town of Kent, but
Okay,
yes.
yes. Gotcha.
Everybody says Carmel because Kent doesn't
Yep.
have a post office.
Well, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
This,
Thank you for your help.
I'm pretty sure everyone remembers this event when it happened. It was kind of the first, shot at normalcy last spring.
Yep.
When everybody
We
was
all
locked
had
in
to
their houses.
cancel all of our
Yep.
in-person.
And my son definitely remembered the big army truck that rolled
Yep.
by our house. He was talking about that for a day or two. So.
And,
Thank you.
And I know that you work with the Veterans Agency for the county, right? Or are you a separate organization?
I'm a separate
Oh,
organization.
okay. Sorry. Tell us a moment about your organization.
Joint Veterans Council was instituted in 1992 as an umbrella organization to coordinate the efforts of all the various veterans organizations in the county. So we have members from every one of the organizations. We come together and meet, distribute information, and plan what is going to be done. Our responsibility includes all of the memorials at the Veterans Park. We're responsible for the flags that get put out on Lake Oneida. Started out with 50 flags. This year we put out 550 flags. And for those of, since somebody asked about it, the banners that are being put up on the flag, the telephone poles, power poles, actually have nothing to do with the flags that are on Oneida. That is a completely separate project. And as I said, if you send me an email and I'll reply with information. I didn't think to bring it with me, but I have cards that tell you how to apply for it.
While you're talking about that, I'm the one that brought it up. You know where they have the pictures of the soldiers and their names in different places? I thought it would look so nice if me and Cold Spring, Phillipstown, could do something like that.
And who currently organizes that?
For the town of Kent, there were 2 women who were working on it. It was a different woman that brought it into Carmel.
I'm sorry, is there, I guess who's the governing body that would?
I don't think there is a single.
I think it's up to the local municipality
Okay.
because
Yeah, it's-
Yorktown
a
Hopewell
person,
Junction, a bunch of different places have it.
it's a person who has brought the idea before their town halls or town boards to implement and get permission to actually put them on the power poles, because you do have to get permission from NYSEG.
It would work well through here. Some of the other municipalities are putting them in high traffic areas. So
Yep.
it's, people are trying to read them. You're doing 60 miles an hour. It's well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
You are very welcome. Along with your meeting, and
Thank you. We will.
hope we all get back to much more normalcy.
We're on our way.
Thank you so much.
Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's everything for reports. Old business. Here is I guess with whom the majority of us are here for tonight, the STR update. And Chris, if you want to
Sure, I'll
go
start
on to
with
that. I kind of wanted to say before we start this that if you've been following along with the debate among the board members in the last 2, 3, 4 meetings, that I think the board is a pretty good litmus test for the entire community, and that, you know, there's definitely disagreement among us up here, so we're still hammering this out amongst ourselves, and your input is meaningful, so speak up.
So, it's been a few months since we've been discussing and postponing for various reasons. So I think where I'll start is kind of a new iteration of edits that we were discussing at our workshop last week. Some where we have consensus, some where we don't. These are not up on the website right now, are they?
Not yet.
Yeah. Because we were discussing them, seeing where we're going with them. A few things where we had some consensus on, I believe, was adding a hold harmless agreement for the village. Similar to what's in the Cold Spring legislation that would essentially hold harmless the village, trustees, representatives, officers, officials, employees, etc., from any and all claims, demands, damages, fines, obligations, suits, penalties, etc., liabilities arising as a result of or arising out of a host's actions or inaction in the operation, occupancy, use, or maintenance of the property. Another thing that we discussed that I think that we had some consensus on was making the gatherings or the parties and events section a little bit more clear, that we're not discouraging any party or event from ever happening in our village. It was really just for the short-term rental property, that we would ask that no more than a maximum of the number of guests issued for the permit be allowed on premises during the short-term rental. And we would keep the rest of the draft language from the current bill saying the registration of the unit may be revoked if the renters or guests of renters number in excess of the permitted number of persons approved for the unit as governed by the applicable laws of New York State. A short-term rental unit shall not be rented for other purpose, commercial or otherwise, not expressly permitted under this Article 9, such as concerts or weddings. What else did we have consensus on? The liability to increase the proof of insurance for a minimum of $1 million liability per occurrence, which is more in line with what regular homeowners would have on their own home policy. We had kind of, I think it was at 500 prior, so that would just raise it to what is typical. We had a kind of wonky section on the review of violations, which said it would go to village court or New York State Supreme Court, which I think was probably a holdover from somebody else's legalese. And we decided that we would just put village court only in our bill. Obviously, if things move up to the next level, they do, but we don't need to write that in our bill. On shared driveways, if there is not an easement already for a shared driveway, we would request that any host with a shared driveway include with the host application for an STR permit a written or notarized statement from each property owner who shares the driveway with the host, stating that they agree to sharing the driveway with short-term rental guests. So I think those were the main areas of consensus, unless I'm wrong. Speak now. Oh, good. Okay. So I'll get to the trickier ones. We were considering requiring that someone, in addition to what's currently in the draft bill language, where we require that someone be in residence at least half of the year or 185 days, we would require potentially having a homeowner have resided in the home for a certain number of years prior to beginning an STR. We know that Cold Spring had put 3 years in their draft proposal thus far. We don't necessarily believe we need to be that stringent or have that much of a period for potentially 1 or 2 years. That's something that we said we would come back to. So I don't know if anybody's thought about that more and have any ideas or suggestions on that. Personally, I would be good with 1 or 2 years. I think the impetus is just to make sure that people don't turn over their homes quickly and to buy their home with the sole purpose of turning it into a short-term rental.
Yeah, I don't understand why Cold Spring has 3. It just seems like an arbitrary number.
So, any thoughts on 1 or 2?
I mean, my general opinion on this is that I don't know how useful it is on top of the existing requirement that you already be a resident, like a homeowner and resident in Nelsonville. I don't know how much it adds. So from that angle, it's like, do we need to add more if it's not adding all that much?
Right.
Just given property values here, I don't think people are buying. I know there's one exception, but generally people aren't really buying properties just to Airbnb and flip and move on.
So perhaps somebody could at day 185 of their living here open their home for a short-term rental option. It's just how folks feel about that. I don't feel as strongly about this one as others. Could also hear from the audience later on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to run through these and then we'll open it up to
Yeah.
people to talk. I think we'll just have the public comment on the STR happen right now after we discuss this, and then we'll move on to the rest of the agenda after that, because I think this is probably going to be the meat of the meeting. So, want to just run down the list, because I think we have to hash some of these as a board too before we come to a concrete answer on a number.
I think something that we discussed at our workshop, but I think we don't have a lot of agreement, or I think we've decided we didn't need it perhaps, is hosts do not utilize, if a host doesn't utilize their permit, they would forfeit it at the end of the year and not reapply for a year. The thought behind that was just to make sure that people don't kind of take permits off the market and hold on to them if they're not actually going to use them. But again, I think some of the other things kind of naturally would potentially not allow that to occur. So,
Or for asking people to pay extra money for their insurance, arguably they would be more motivated to actually, earn some money by doing their short-term rental, because it is an expense. We were not entirely clear of how much extra it would be for the homeowner, but it would be a motivating factor to actually, once you get the permit, once you have everything in place, to kind of get it going. So perhaps it's not as strong of a point in light of everything else we're putting in.
and I would really hope that, folks wouldn't put all the effort into having their home inspected and go through the process of, making it presentable and marketable and everything, and then not use their permits. But that was just a concern, fleeting concern. And we also talked about adding additional permit slots for less frequent renting for up to 2 weeks to accommodate folks who have historically let out their homes for West Point graduation, or even if they want to go on vacation for 2 weeks, and it's a good opportunity to make some money while they're not at home. That would increase from, if we stick with the parameter of the 5% of our housing stock, or 12 regular permits, that would add an additional 4. That would still have to go through the same process of application and inspection, just to make sure that it's safe and meets those standards, but would be in addition to those regular permits. And we'll just keep going through it all, and then we'll talk about it all. For fairness of folks in with permits, if we were to hit a cap, again, currently, I looked today again, we currently only have 6 folks who are currently on Airbnb. I didn't look at the rest of them. And if we were to hit the cap of 12 regular units, a suggestion would be to implement a lottery system to make it fair for folks on an annual basis, to not only have one person or 12 folks have the opportunity. And anything else? I think that's generally the small additions that we were considering.
I don't know if it's worth just kind of calling up those last couple of items kind of specific to the proposed cap. I think that was one of our bigger discussions last week, where we probably definitely don't have consensus, is, if we need the cap at all, and what the appropriate way to handle that is.
I spoke to Chris earlier today. I went home after last meeting and just kind of sat and thought through what the impetus was behind pushing this all in the beginning, and in my mind it was always safety, number one. And that's kind of where I want to focus it. I don't want to feel like we're an albatross or taking stuff away from people. I think that's where a lot of the vitriol and anger comes from the community, is when they feel like something's being taken from them. But on the other side of it, there's definitely things in here that add to that safety aspect that we need to follow through on. So with that in mind, I don't know if you want to hear from the crowd now, or do you want to?
Well, another idea that I had, sort of in thinking about the cap, because I think it has turned out to be a very sort of, not a divisive issue for us, but it was definitely something that we discussed a lot at the last meeting. And, I'm generally a big proponent of kind of building in an escape hatch or some kind of built-in discretion mechanism. So my idea was, let's say if we do have a cap, and we reach a cap, that it would be up to the board to sort of either hold a lottery or elect to increase the number of units that would become available, which I think would kind of, you know, we might not be on the board sort of however many years from now, but it would allow those board members to decide what would make the most sense at that particular moment, just because the landscape of short-term rentals is forever evolving. And my sister-in-law just told me about yet another company that has a very different system of how they do short-term rentals, where it's, you kind of buy into it, like homeowners buy into it and you kind of can go and swap places. It might, you know, so 5 years from now, short-term rental market might look very, very differently. So we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into a very specific kind of idea of what it looks like now, because it might not really reflect where we will be a few years from now. So on a personal level, perhaps it's being an attorney and always thinking of how I'm going to get out of this later. I would be personally, where I sit right now, in favor of some kind of mechanism for leave it up to sort of the next iteration of the board to decide, would it make the most sense to do a lottery, or again, with the view of preservation of the housing stock, safety, parking, all of the issues that we have been discussing, and why this bill kind of sort of what initiated the idea for this bill to begin with, or would it just make the most sense if it's one extra person, should we just increase it to 13 units and everybody's happy? So
The only problem with that is, what if the board at the time decides arbitrarily they don't like that person and won't increase it? That's where it leaves the door open for decisions like that, which are going to be unfair to people. Which is why I'm almost leaning towards leaving it without a cap, because the law can be amended at any time in the future by the board to institute a cap if they wanted to.
Which is why I think we should have a cap, because we can amend the law at any time.
And what became first, the chicken or the egg?
I tend to also be kind of on the lighter touch camp of, you know, let's start with kind of like the scaffolding. You know, I think putting a permitting system in place is a great start. It gives us the opportunity to, if we, hopefully we don't have to, but if we need to, we can revoke permits from bad actors. I think limiting to Nelsonville residents will go a really long way in sort of incentivizing good behavior. But I worry about layering in a lot of detail that you know, might have unintended consequences, and also, you know, we don't, it's kind of responding to things that haven't really happened yet.
I mean, I read the Cold Spring Law, and the bureaucracy that's creating. I mean, that is a full-time job in and of itself for a building inspector to enforce. I worry that creating that up here with, you know, a part-time building inspector is going to be a lot. I mean, down there, I mean, they're limiting the amount of that you can have on one street and all of this other, you know, different aspects of the law that I think is just, it's too much. I mean, in my opinion. And we've heard from everybody, and I'm going to put you on the spot.
No, I think a cap, like Chris says, is kind of a good idea to start out with.
All right.
And then go from there and see what happens.
All right.
You know, like you say, you got 12. Is it 12 you say, or 15?
It would be 12 regular, and then 4 if we decide to have this new edit, 4 for shorter term rentals.
You know, the cap is like a good idea to have. To start with.
And we could,
with a mechanism in the law to allow the board at its discretion to
change if it has to be changed.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to believe in the good faith of our successors, right? Just kidding.
you haven't been here for my predecessor.
Yeah, I like closing point of that is just like, if we're just writing into the bill that we can just continually expand the cap, so what's the point of having a cap in the first place?
yeah, I don't know if we can, and we should check in with our lawyer on that one. We haven't done that level yet, so we could see if it would even be feasible. The recommendations.
Yeah, and again, this is all it's the sausage making up here, where we're trying to come to another draft of this to bring to another public hearing to get input. It still needs to get vetted through our attorney again. Should I open it up?
Sure.
Well, Ethan, I'll give you the first shot if you want, because
For me?
yeah. If you want to, do you want to read your letter? Do you want us to,
Or summarize.
or summarize? I had mentioned it earlier in the correspondence section.
Okay.
So
I don't know if I can say it by heart, but I actually had a couple questions.
go right ahead.
Maybe one, speaking of Cold Spring, because something that really concerns me about in Cold Spring is at the very end, it says that the Village of Cold Spring Police will be enforcing. And so I'm curious, so I reread the Nelsonville proposed law, and I don't see any description of enforcement. So in terms of in terms of the now, like you said, Cold Spring is a lot more nuanced, and I'm imagining Cold Spring Police trying to figure out if there's one adult and two children in the room, blah blah blah, which seems almost farcical. But my question is, despite that, so it is somewhat less complex, but still, is the only mechanism of enforcement proposed the building inspector, or would it be the sheriff?
The building inspector for most, but I mean, the only time I could envision the sheriff being involved is if there's a noise complaint. I don't envision neighbors calling the police on their neighbors saying that there's 11 people instead of 8 in the house.
And so I guess to summarize what I wrote, because I don't have to read the whole thing, and maybe it'll be online, but
the draft is on our website under current issues all the way to the right.
No, I mean I wasn't going to read the whole.
Oh yeah, no, I'll add it to the correspondence.
But my general feeling is that any problem proposed to be addressed here, as you mentioned, noise, should be able to be addressed by existing ordinances. There's mentions of people feeling unsafe. If you feel unsafe on the street, you can potentially call 911. If you have a noise complaint, there's existing noise ordinances, etc. I commend it for being less complex, but still it seems to me to introduce a super complex mechanism. And as you said, the real estate markets are shifting. I personally had positive experiences with neighbors who rent Airbnb. I've done it sometimes myself, as I mentioned in the letter, sometimes longer than a month, sometimes less, but sometimes for family. The flexibility is really a positive thing for me, and it seems like if anyone ever had a problem with what a guest was doing, there should be existing ordinances, as opposed to trying to micromanage how people are using their real estate. So sorry, but my main question was enforcement, because what I see is the only way is, like you said, you have a part-time building inspector, or I guess you're going to be having neighbors calling the sheriff on the fact that the person down the street has an Airbnb, and I just don't know what that's going to look like.
I don't either.
It doesn't sound good to me.
And I don't want to speak to Cold Springs, but I mean, I think having the police enforce their STR law is going to lead to some interesting interactions, but I'll leave it at that. Anybody else? Frank?
Frank Esposito from next door, lived here all my life. I just had a couple questions to ask the board. I know you guys, I appreciate you guys have had a lot of discussion and brought up a lot of ideas and you're hashing things out, but have you reached out to any other communities that obviously have been through this before? For example, Airbnbs and rentals have been a beachfront property in Cape May and Montauk. I'm sure that it's both different for them, but they've gone through a lot of problems. So have you reached out to them and found out what they've discovered to do the best? So cut through a lot of stuff that you guys are like cut to the chase and find out what's really going on. And then you have to apply that to our community, which is a little bit different, granted. And is this a lot of these thoughts based on what your insurance policy for your home is going to tell you to do? I mean, it's some of that stuff might be obvious, but.
So the specific question about municipalities, on our website we have codes from Beacon, Irvington, Cornwall, and Montgomery that pass laws that we kind of based ours off of. So our first draft was done with Chris and Brian Morgan, our attorney, kind of a conglomerate of all these different laws and we're trying to find the right
The happy medium.
the right
fits
mix
for
of
us.
everything. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges too is that a lot of these laws have been put into place relatively recently, because obviously this is like a newer thing, so there isn't a ton of information about the downstream effects of the bill. So we can definitely look to see, kind of what presumed best practices are. But there's only a few years of data on sort of how that impacted.
Yeah, so from my angle, from the legal angle, there are really, under, I think, 5 or 6 reported cases between state and federal cases in New York State dealing with short-term rentals and municipalities or towns passing certain restrictions on short-term rentals. And I can tell you that a couple of these cases come at a procedural stance where you don't even know where exactly it's going to end. So we don't know, sort of, in an ideal world, a village like us looks at some of the case law to kind of see what works and what doesn't, so that we know kind of what the courts have stamped as, yes, this is okay to do. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of guidance. So we know what has been passed. We don't know, it hasn't really been tested. So there hasn't been a lot of litigation that has gone up further, to an appellate court, or has not gone through a trial where we can see, okay, this is ultimately what we think the law is. So we're kind of in an uncharted territory here, so we're just kind of trying to see what would make the most sense for the community with the goal that we have in mind, which is safety, housing stock preservation, and, parking, sort of, with all the good things that, all the
Community
good
character.
motivations that we have in mind.
Can I ask what safety concerns you're?
So I mean, when I spoke to that originally, what I had in mind was that if you're renting out your house, that you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, just general things that you need to
Is
do.
that just
Building
for
safety.
short-term rentals or any rental?
I mean, for any renting, yeah.
So
I mean-
any rental is going to be annual inspection of smoke detector and safety?
That only occurs when houses change hands. So real estate transactions, to close on your house, you need to have.
Okay, but if
But there should be an annual inspection
Are you going to pass a law?
for, no, it's actually a state law, and
Okay.
we're not always up to
Okay, so
date
because
on it,
there are
but
rental
for-
units in
correct.
this village.
Yes.
we actually do have a plan for that this year.
Or if we decide to maybe not do short-term rentals, but month to month, or we have a monthly rental, will you then still have this mandate of inspections, examinations?
And can they have one extra person over for a barbecue?
Well, that's has nothing to do with safety, I think. But,
Like,
I think if I can speak for a second,
Please.
maybe a
Yeah.
minute or two, I really question the whole initiative of this proposed law. It seems, we take it personal. As of now, I think there's only 4 short-term rentals advertised in Nelsonville.
6 as of today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yesterday I looked. It was only 4. I don't know. Maybe you have the numbers, but 2 of them are ours. And when I read I tried to listen to the workshop recording. It was garbled.
We heard that's why we didn't try to
That's
get
why we're in person.
Excuse me.
That's why we're in person. Tom.
Yeah. No. That's why. Yeah.
We tried.
It's very nice. It's good to have the face-to-face. But I did read the minutes, and again, it seems like we had Sonia wrote a letter after the last meeting, public hearing, and we had some questions in that letter, and it seems like they were just posted, the letter was posted, there are no answers, we haven't received any answers as to what are the documented cases of problems that have occurred that brought this law into being, or this whole initiative. And then more troublesome is we got a letter from the building inspector from the village of Nelsonville, an official letter stating that there are several complaints about our property, about our rentals, our Airstream that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and parties that were having weddings against village regulations. And we haven't been able to see the specific complaints. That's anonymous, the person who complained, or the occurrence. The laws that we violated were not specified, but we were asked friendly to stop all illegal activity. So I would like some clarification on that. This would maybe be a good time to get that. And then still, the first proposal of this draft was accompanied by 4 communities that have passed laws recently, and a survey, anonymous survey, that anybody could have filled this out with some comments that are friendly, some ridiculous comments. I mean, seriously, negative comments. I am not personally affected by, I've heard many stories about the party house by Haldane. That's us, right? So,
There's actually a few Airbnbs that I've seen near Haldane, but
I think
if
the
you
party house
think
by
that it's
Haldane,
you,
I think
go
we all agree that's us, right? We are having the parties, you all heard them from here, through the crickets on Seacrest Street. You can sometimes hear some music in the woods. That'd be us.
I personally, I'm sorry,
No, go
finish
ahead.
first.
I like to
I personally
hear
don't want to discuss specific things
Well,
about your property if they were
if you're
being
talking about-
inspected by the building inspector.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I've met with Bill about outstanding certificates of occupancy and things that were left by George, who had a different approach to his work. And that's fine. I'm okay with Bill coming and clearing that all up. That has nothing to do with our short-term rentals. Our short-term rentals, as far as I'm concerned, we are there. These are our guests that we entertain. They come. They may pay us valuable consideration or not, but that's really none of anybody's business. We are there, we entertain them. It could be 5 people, it could be 2 people, it could be 12 people. We could have a party. We had a party for 200 people last New Year's. Is that a violation? Is that illegal? Apparently so, because we got cited by the building inspector.
For that? Wait. For that party?
No, not of that party, but there were parties.
No, but I mean, if you're having a personal get-together on your own property, there's nothing
so
for us to say.
Who's to say that the get-togethers that he was referring to were not personal? Who knows that?
That speaks to the vagary of everything and
Very vague.
yeah, the stuff being unenforceable.
Laws on vague allegations. I don't think that's how it works. I think that as far as the complaints go, if I look at the village code, the building inspector shall investigate all written complaints and keep a record thereof. And those are public records, and I have foiled them. They don't exist. They're made up. Now, USCC'd on this letter. I can hardly imagine that when you got this letter, when you saw this letter, that you did not ask yourself what these complaints were, since you have only one written complaint ever about the short-term rental. One only. And that's from 2019, from the house next to the highway garage, where somebody parked in somebody's grass. And that's the only written complaint, the only complaint on record. Now that Mr. Cheda had some complaints, which may be valid. I'm not discounting your complaints. I'm not saying that they're not valid. If there is reason for complaint, if you don't feel safe, or if there's a noise complaint, call the police. I have a list here of, I did some research myself. New York State has 43 villages with a population between 550 and 750. 24 of them have 2 or more Airbnb listings. And I'm going to list them here. Sharon Springs has 15 Airbnbs, population 550, no regulations. Lions Falls, population 566, 2 Airbnbs, no regulations. Morris, 2 Airbnbs, population 583, no regulations. Odessa, population 591, 1 Airbnb, no regulation. Margaritaville, population 596, 12 Airbnbs, no regulations. Unionville, population 612, 2 Airbnbs, no regulations. I need my glasses. I can't read this.
I think you meant Margaretville, not Margaritaville.
Margaretaville.
Otherwise,
Sorry.
I mean,
We should all move there.
and I know where most of these towns are. I mean,
Okay.
like Sharon Springs, they have a lot of Airbnbs there because all the hotels and resorts are
It's on
abandoned
here. I
shells.
think it's on here, Sharon. Can I
It
do
is. It was
this?
one of the first or second you mentioned.
Okay, it's there. I just want to drive the point home
Yep.
that I know that Amsterdam has Airbnb regulations, so does Paris, New York City, Rome. Nelsonville, we need them too, really, seriously. We have one complaint ever.
I
You're spending all this time.
I hear what you're saying about the complaints, and that is definitely a
Okay.
valid point to bring up.
All right.
The towns that you're citing are definitely different than Nelsonville.
How
We're attached to Cold Spring and Phillipstown and Garrison in the Hudson Highlands. We are a tourist mecca, so there is a great potential for this to explode in this area. Can we agree on that? Yes, the housing market is through the roof. People
Well,
are
I'm
not going
a
to buy
realtor.
houses and flip
I'm a
them over
realtor.
and all that stuff.
Right? We're both realtors. How many calls have you gotten from people who want to buy a house there and exploit it?
Since the pandemic, zero.
Well, even before the pandemic. I've
No,
done it
there
for
was
3
there
years.
were a few.
I had a few, and then when I ran the numbers by them, I never heard back
Yeah.
from them again because it's not feasible. Nobody's going to buy
Not
a
just
house.
is it not feasible, but as soon as you mention that the municipalities are thinking about implementing any kind of legal regulation over it, they don't want anything to do with it because they don't want to live there.
Even then, I mean, here,
No.
I've heard numbers said that there were at one point 12 or 13 Airbnbs in this village. Never. If you can document that, I'd like to see
I didn't print it out when I looked, but
You have it?
I did not print it out, but when I
Okay.
initially, when we were doing the survey, that is how many it was.
I mean, there are people who have tried it and decided it wasn't for them.
Nora, she had it, so her house was for sale, so she tried to
Yeah.
recoup some money. I hope that everybody would like to do that if
Mhm.
they move out of state and they're trying to sell their house, and if they want to recoup some money while it's on the market, they should be able to do that without big hassle. Nora did it, but she sold her house because it's not profitable to run an Airbnb if you don't live there.
Mhm.
It just doesn't work. You do the math, it does not work. There's no risk of housing stock disappearing because people are buying houses to run an Airbnb. It just does not work. The math does not compute. You have to service it, you have to have somebody to turn it over, to manage it, and then what are you going to get for it? I mean, we had an apartment that's attached to our house visit, $250 a night. We sleeps 4. We got maybe 3 weekends out of the month, maybe another day in between. So you make, at the most, you're better off just renting it full time. And that counts for any property here.
Yeah.
If it were to happen, excuse me?
Profit margins.
Too thin, absolutely. If it was profitable, it would have already happened. Airbnb's been around for 10 years. It would have already happened. And then, no campers. I have an Airstream in the woods. People love it. I have hundreds of positive, like 5-star reviews. People make great memories there. Everybody loves it. I have a book with reviews. People have a great time. They keep great memories of Nelsonville. They draft regulation, no campers. Where does that come from? What is that? Inexplicable. That's directed at us. No parties. That's directed at us. We've had weddings at
No
our house.
concerts, we had David Rothenberg and Jay play in our
This is
car,
this is
now we
personal.
can't have that?
We are attacked. We feel attacked.
If you're
and you
doing
are
it as part of
taking
a short-term rental, then
No.
it wouldn't be
No,
allowed.
but that doesn't, it just says no concert.
No, it says in the,
As part of it. So
If-
what does that mean?
If
If we have a West Point family staying in the house,
it's
they can't have people over for
Rudy,
barbecue?
it's a very, very narrow and tricky line that we're walking. If you have a concert there for your family and friends, fine.
Right.
If you're
How
having
do
a
you know
paid
that?
event there where you
Do
have
we have to call you and clear
no,
it?
if you have a paid event there, that is
A paid
you're now
event.
outside of what your house
How
is
about
zoned
a
for.
fundraiser when people pay money for a cause? Is that a paid event?
You could probably, in this whole vein
I
of
mean-
thinking, come here for a permit for that.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, but still, where is the necessity to do this now? You have some draft legislation. As far as I know, there are no problems in this village, the Airbnb. Mr. Cheda has a problem with a neighbor, I think he doesn't live there.
I have a problem too. I live 2 doors away from an Airbnb. You
All
should
right,
be
yeah,
so
let's.
sure.
All right, hold
Okay,
on, wait,
how
time
about
out, time
Well, I
out.
have a lot to say.
There's a
Rudy,
lot of
Rudy.
noise.
But we've got a full crowd for COVID crowd here, so let's let other people speak too. And then we're gonna have, this is gonna go through
Yeah,
public
yeah.
hearing after
But
public
also,
hearing.
I'd like answers for all these questions. Like, what is the initiative, or what brought this all about? Like,
I told you from the very beginning, I mean, we've been discussing this in Nelsonville at least 3 years. In Cold Spring, they've been talking about it for probably 7 or 8. And in my mind, when we started talking about it as a board here, it was safety. I want to make sure that your apartment or whatever you're renting out has proper smoke detectors. I'm thinking of it as like a fireman.
Okay.
I don't want it to burn down with 10 people inside of it that aren't supposed
If
to be
that's,
there.
if that's a true concern, I can appreciate that.
Mhm.
And then do a
And
safety inspection at all rental properties and maybe even all houses.
It's
Houses can
well,
burn down too. Why don't you do an annual inspection every house, every year? They can burn down.
That's not a state requirement.
That's what?
It's not a state
It is not a
requirement.
state requirement.
It's a
Okay.
requirement if you sell your house that
Okay.
you have it inspected and that you are up to the building codes
But
of your
it's not a requirement
municipality.
to sign a
and state.
lease to a renter.
That's part of the state code. Is that if you have a rental property, it
You
is
can amend the
going to
code, I
be
mean, that's kind of,
inspected.
none of this is part of the state.
Yeah, I mean if you moved into an apartment right now and you didn't have any smoke detectors in it, you could report your landlord to the municipality and we would have to look into it.
Yeah, it's a valid point that would, if that's the objective, it would be a much wider public good to amend state building code to say that at any turnover there should be smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Which actually
We
is a
can't
good-
do that on the local level though. That is just-
Yeah, but when you sell your property,
Okay.
you to close on your property, if you don't have operating smoke detectors in every bedroom and carbon monoxide next to the boiler and drywall above
Lead
the boiler.
detector, like lead,
Yeah,
up to
you know,
code.
like lead paint disclosures, you know.
So all that
No, I
needs
get it,
to
but you can have local amendments to the code. I don't see why, if you can't do it for, you can do it for this, you could do it for all of it. If it's just a time limited thing.
You know,
I missed you, Frank.
you're talking apples and oranges here. You're talking about people that live in a house, and you're talking about renting a house, leasing a house. You take on a responsibility for your guests to make sure that they're in a safe environment. How you live in your own house is up to you.
Okay. If I live in my own house.
I mean, the house next to me, you're saying safety inspections. They have one way in and one way out. How's that gonna pass? Dive out the window? No. You should be expected to provide some kind of safety for your guests, your paying guests. Ooh. Yeah. There's no balcony.
Oh, yeah. that was-
Anybody else?
The button coming in, that's it. That's the only way to get out.
Hi.
That's the only way to get out.
Introduce yourself for people that don't know you.
No, it's two apartments now.
All right, we're moving on here. Over here.
My name's David Herman. I live right next to Mayor Mike.
Yep.
We've been here for about a year and a half.
City.
Sorry. I was going to send, we were going to try to send an email in because we've noticed, we've been following the public comments and the meetings, and we've noticed that the public comment letters have all been sort of sentiment and sort of against some of the regulations. So we wanted to just come and express some views in support of what is trying to be achieved in the regulation. So I was just gonna, I do better by reading. I'm not like a speech person, and I'll email this if it's helpful after.
If you can, yeah, and we'll add it to the web.
And just before I get to this, yeah, Chris and you both mentioned that you've been working on this for a few years. I'll tell you, when we were considering where to move in late 2019, Airbnb was actually the top of our list. So we went around and ruled out Beacon because we had experience with Airbnb there and we're not comfortable with just sort of the transient nature of like people coming in from the weekend and not knowing on very residential streets. You know, we stayed at a place and I know that if we lived next door I wouldn't have been happy that people were cycling in and out every weekend. So I think one of the reasons we focused on Cold Spring and Nelsonville was because one, we knew there weren't regulations that were lax, and two, that you were looking at putting regulation in. So safety and community mindedness I know people can scoff at, well, we've been here for a year and a half, what do we know? But I think it's clear it's a close-knit community, and part of what creates such a safe space for our kids is knowing our neighbors, feeling good about letting our kids walk to their friends' houses, walk to and from school, walk through the woods, walk into town. And the more we invite transients to be in the community, I think the more it just changes. And it might not happen overnight, and it might not happen in a year, but it could, over time, really change. What, in a very short time, has very clearly been pretty consistent community for years. I mean, we're friendly with people that have been here since they're kids, and have chosen to stay. I think this follows similar across a whole host of other quality of life and safety issues: noise, trash, speeding. I mean, the speeding on some of these roads is crazy, and I think it's pretty safe to say the people that you need to be concerned about are the ones that don't live here, that don't know how dangerous it can be, and taking care of our woods and our natural environment. Housing stock, as I said, we're relatively new to Nelsonville. We were fortunate enough to be able to find a house and be able to afford a house. And when we first started looking, there's not a big housing stock in these towns. And, I know it's academic and someone may dispute it, but I think conceptually the more open and flexible a short-term rental policy, it follows that I know you've talked about like these zombie owners, and that's the big concern, and people are going to flip, buy a house and become landlords. I don't even think that's really it. I think it's as much people that move here and they'll be here part of the time. And I don't think it is presumptuous a little bit of me to talk what I think is good for the town, being fairly new. But that drives up the price of homes. And what that does is it makes it harder for people who have grown up here to be able to find houses and stay here. And it makes it harder for people like me with young families to move here because you have other factors affecting home value and home prices. Because someone will come and say, you know what, I live in the city, I'll come up half the time, maybe I'll be here 190 days so that I don't have to pay New York City, income tax, and but I'm going to Airbnb it for the other half of the year. And that's good for people looking to sell their houses. That's good for the people looking to buy the houses and take advantage of short-term rentals. But, I just think the people that are going to be most affected and shut out of the housing market are the groups that are going to be feeding our schools, keeping them strong, supporting local businesses, not in summer, not on the weekends, but in the winter and Monday through Thursday. Ensuring there are more kids coming to town. So we have Little League teams, so we have the Cub Scouts and the Girl Scouts. We can keep our nursery schools open, support the arts. And I think the more the real estate market turns into one that doesn't foster families, I think the more there's going to long-term be an adverse effect. It also means people that own houses aren't going to be volunteers. So I know Mike, all these towns are going to be coming up with big issues around lack of volunteers for critical services.
It's already there.
And, this isn't going to help. Zoning. I don't know. I know a few of you in this room. Give me a few years and maybe I'll know more of you. I'm sympathetic to the impact. It might not sound like I am. I am. The impact it has on people who have made decisions about their properties and their life over the last number of years. And regulation may affect them. One, I'd say, based on what Chris has said, it won't, because if your point is that there's only 4 or 6 short-term rentals happening, no one is being shut out of the market. But houses are zoned residential, or properties are zoned commercial, and that's town zoning. And if people have been able to take advantage of the fact that we live in a small village that can't, regulate or oversee whether people are sticking with how properties are zoned. Okay, but that doesn't mean that it's permanent, and that we shouldn't, as a community, try to fix that. If I bought a house next to a property that was zoned commercial, okay, I get it. Like, it's going to be a restaurant or it's going to be a hotel. And if it's not zoned for that, they'll have to come to the zoning board and ask for some change in zoning. So, I'm sympathetic, but on the other hand, I'm not. And just candidly, I'm not. I'd say, if anything, the regulations are providing more flexibility, technically, than what really should be happening, because it's allowing people to use residential property in a short-term way. And that's something that I don't think is necessarily in place right now.
David, can you send this in to us so that we can read it and digest it all? Is there a lot more?
Very short.
Okay.
I was going to say, the exceptions, you actually, sounds like it came up in one of your meetings. The exception that my wife and I were talking about was that we're sort of comfortable with. We like defined exceptions for special permits. We know that families going to their in-laws for a week and renting out the place during West Point graduation, if it's like very specific, defined, the community is aware of it, the community knows there are going to be people that are in the neighborhood, I think that's different. And so I think we would be supportive of that type of exception, and quite honestly, I'll very quickly get to what I think of the cap, but I think there could actually be more flexibility on the number of special permits. I think that's where there should be flexibility, not on the cap itself. But to some of the discussion you've all had, if time proves the village can increase the cap or loosen some of the other regulations without an adverse effect, I think that's great, right? Like, you can put in regulation with a cap, you can see how it goes, you can see, well, geez, we only had 2 years of this many permits requested, or we haven't had any noise complaints. But I think if you put in place too few regulations, there's a potential that there could be adverse impacts that are slightly more irreparable than someone lost out on getting a permit for a year. Because it can trickle through the housing market and impacting lots of, I just think it's much easier to move up over time as you get real world sort of evidence than to go the other way. And so for all those reasons and a lot more we've read, in your meetings, we've read and listened to the Cold Spring meetings, we've read stuff about lots of other communities. We're in favor of what, we appreciate what you're doing. As a family that moved here, in part because we were hoping something like this would be how a village like this lives, right? We care about our community and our neighborhood. We're supportive of it. And, if the cap were to be increased, I think, quite honestly, you might want to revisit some of the other regulations to figure out, well, do you need to clamp down on some other things if there wasn't a cap?
Thank you.
So that's my piece.
It's good to hear a new voice.
Hi, Dave McCarthy, 56 Main Street. It's tough to live in a free country, and there's a lot that goes with that, a lot of personal responsibility that people have to take, and it's not always easy. But specifically, I support Rudolph and Sonia for the main reason that they're always there. It's very different than what I think you're dealing with and that others are dealing with. Not only are they there, they're very responsive, they care. He's a fireman, Sonia's at the chapel restoration, they're like huge parts of this community. So they do wonderful things here, and they're not absentee landlords who are just kind of giving their place out to whoever's willing to pay the highest buck. They're hosting, they're real hosts. So I think, we need to think about that. There's a big difference between people who are there and who are going to answer the phone if the police call or if neighbors call. And absentee landlords who just rent it out to whoever. So I would rather see this law focused on what do we do with the people who are abusing this than how can we prevent this. Because I use it. I'm an Airbnb. I love Airbnb. I'm using it in Chicago this weekend. Don't tell anybody else because my house will be empty. I'm not Airbnb. And I've Airbnb'd it for West Point, and it's awesome. I love it. So
Are you going to a Cubs game?
they're out of town.
Good.
I know, unfortunately.
I would be jealous then.
But I think when the residents are there, that should count for something big. You know, it's not, it's a totally different ballgame, in my opinion, when the homeowners are there and when they're not.
Thank you. Mary Lou.
Well, my situation is that the house next to us, they've never lived there. They bought the house, and they're, like you said, hasn't happened here, happens here. They bought the house, it's 2 apartments. They kicked out the resident that was living in the downstairs apartment. They haven't done anything with it, and they rent out the upstairs apartment. And they're booked for the whole summer. The only time we see them is they come up on, usually on a Wednesday, to change the sheets and clean up, and that's it. And that's my problem, because I agree with everything you've said, that they're really taking away, they're never going to be involved with our community. And it's just not right. I just don't think it's fair to other people that would rent the place. They could rent down one of the apartments for help money-wise, live in it, and at least be part of the community. But these people, I wouldn't even know. I think they live in Mount Kisco, and they also have an apartment in New York City. So, who do you call if something? So I know I would call the cops or the fire company. But if, like, we had a bad windstorm, and one of the trees came down and landed on the roof of the shed. Now, as a neighbor, I would call him and say, hey, we had a problem up here. I wouldn't want to have to call the cops and all that. But they went for a good 2 weeks or so before they got up here and saw the damage they had. But I had no way to know how to contact them or anything because they're not sociable, And I don't have a problem with, like, Corliss was saying, because he has the house up here, and he was talking about doing Airbnbs on one of our Zoom meetings. I don't have a problem with that. He lives in the town of Phillipstown. He belongs to stuff. Even though he might not belong to Nelsonville stuff, he belongs to Cold Spring stuff. Everybody knows him. He's a good guy. But these people are strangers. Even you, I'm not going to complain, but if you're on the property, like you were saying, you're watching what's going on. But I think, when you have
we all have
somebody
a responsibility to be good neighbors. I think
I think what is coming out of this is that
we have to be good neighbors.
there's a middle ground here, and we just need to find it. And
It's hard to legislate.
we're getting closer, so I'll put it that way.
It's hard to
Might not
legislate
look it,
having
but-
good neighbors. You can't make laws for somebody to be a good neighbor. You could be stuck with a much worse neighbor. I have been. When I lived in Cold Spring, I had a nightmare neighbor for 2 years. He never left because he was not an Airbnb area. He lived there. And I was stuck with him.
I know. I've lived in Cold Spring all my life.
Okay.
My parents were renters, so I know.
So you know that can happen. That
Yes.
you cannot make a law demanding that your neighbors are good neighbors.
Yes.
We try. Everybody should try. I think your neighbor is a lousy neighbor, and if there is any part of any law ordinance that he violates, I think he should get on it. I think the village has to get on it and take care of that situation.
I know I already spoke. Can I pipe in?
Briefly,
First of all,
please.
I'm Ethan. I just had to say, because I think maybe Sonia and Rudolph's closest neighbor. I grew up in Cold Spring. I'm new to Nelsonville. This is going to sound funny, but I'm not being dramatic. I read this and I thought to myself, Sonia and Rudolph are great neighbors. What if this made them have to move? And who knows? It's kind of like what you're saying. Who knows who would buy the house? They might not be good neighbors. So I don't think we can legislate who our neighbors are and whether we like them or not. I do agree. I think there's there's a total difference between someone who's far away and renting periodically. But that being said, absentee landlords more than 3 months are not great either, and I don't see that being legislated. So, but I do think there's like, pardon the cliche, but there's kind of a baby in a bathwater kind of situation here. And maybe it hinges on that absentee part, but I do honestly feel that about Rudolph and Sonia specifically, that like that they're great neighbors. That there once in a while they have people there. Some of them I've met. They're nice too. So
there's a few different things to consider. There's that, and then even where their house is compared to where this other house is, you know, you have neighbors right on top of one another. You have more spacious, you know, multi-acre properties. So there's things that we need to kind of look at. If maybe even there's zones within the village that we can look at.
If somebody's making, I mean, this is really like a business, right?
Mhm.
Yes. So, shouldn't that be zoned commercial? When you
That,
think about
yeah,
it.
that's the unfortunate thing, is that there are no federal or state laws over you know, providing any oversight over this, and it's left up to the municipalities.
Ideally, the county should be the one overseeing this, because you know they're the ones that are supposed to pass the hospitality laws and all that, and Putnam really doesn't have any.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add my voice to David's, that I think you guys did a great job with the regulation, and I think it's more fair to people to have the rules laid out. I mean, we live in a country with the rule of law. I mean, it's not intended at anybody, and I totally agree that the absentee owners are the problem. I live 2 doors down from the same absent party that rents out their house and doesn't live there, and it's very noisy and it's really disturbing. The guests speed down the street, and Joe, my husband goes out to the end of the driveway every time they roll in, speeding down. I mean, why should we have to call the cops every time they speed down the street? I mean, I think that the regulation, it's not intended at anybody. In my opinion, it's not intended at anybody who lives here. It's intended at the absentees. But I think it should have a cap, because I think it should have some enforceability. People can't know how long someone's in their house, if they're in their house half the year or not. The cap is a very bright line thing that you can know if the person does or doesn't have a permit. Like if that house 2 doors down from me doesn't have a permit, then they shouldn't be Airbnb-ing their house. Joe and I could easily see that. That way we don't have to get into someone else's business, like how many days of the year are they there. We can just notice, hey, they don't have a permit. Then we can take care of that, call Bill Bajarski, and just say, they're still Airbnb-ing their house.
But
We can tell.
Can't they get a permit? I mean,
Well, if they have no, they can't, because they don't live there.
There's I don't want to get into the weeds, but there's a few things there. Like, how's Bill going to know that they've lived there 184 days and not 186 days? And
Well, what I'm trying to say
that
is,
kind of
if
thing.
we need some things in the regulation that are easily enforced, like whether there's a permit, whether the cap has been exceeded. Those things are easily
And I think
enforced.
that's what I was.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I was trying to communicate that better earlier in the meeting. Is that the easy stuff is what we should be focusing on. It's the more nuanced and bureaucratic albatross, for lack of a better term, that we need to kind of avoid.
The common denominator, though, I mean, whether you make certain laws for the people who aren't around and different laws for the people who are there all the time, or if they're both the same for both, where does it get resolved? It gets resolved only with the people that are there. Whether you're making the same law for both parties or different laws for each party, obviously the trouble is the ones that aren't there, because the only resolution is going to happen for the ones that are on site.
Although there is a addition in the law, or in the draft law, that would require that if you are not on site, you would have a manager listed, so that we would be able to get in touch with somebody quickly if there was a problem. But I see your point.
Hotline to call someone that's going to be responsible.
Anybody else briefly before we move on quickly?
Well, I'm Jay Nicholas. I live in client position, and moved here in 2008. And we've done long term, and we've done short term. and they both have their pros and cons, you know. But when we did the short term, we really needed the money, and so it was, you know, it was crucial for us at that time. I mean, even when we did the long term, it paid our taxes. I mean, the taxes are high, and I mean, we really needed the income. So to have it was good. You know, nobody does it for fun. It's a lot of work to do an Airbnb and to manage it. And so if you don't really need the money, you don't bother with it. So it kind of comes to me, a lot of it is people who are for it, you know, looser regulations need the money. People who are for the tighter regulations don't need the money. I might be generalizing, but and as someone that enjoys Airbnb and other places around wherever I go, it's hard to swallow that I'm sort of feeling singled out in this community that I can't do it. I mean, I don't, right now I don't do any rentals. We're taking a break, you know, because, you know, being the landlord is work, and so is doing the Airbnb, and it's not free money. And so it would be great if there was a way. So the good thing about Airbnb is that there's comments and there's feedback on these people renting the places. You can look at them. Don't want them in the house because they have negative feedback, negative, you know, you don't have to have them. And you don't get that with long-term renters. You don't have the same kind of database of their behavior as you get with Airbnb people.
You mean their references lie?
What's that?
Their references lie? I mean,
well,
every time you rent, you should get references for the people that you're renting.
I mean, I checked references and stuff, and I don't know,
Ask them
maybe
for their
references
tax
could lie.
returns. You can't ask an Airbnb
But what I was going to say was,
for
it would be great if the neighbors that have a problem could sort of email the hosts and say these people were really loud if they weren't here.
Yeah.
And I was always on site with my Airbnbs too. So, I mean, that's all I want to add. That, and of course, things that we really want to be, like the problem they're having with people that aren't there, that is a huge problem. But I'm not sure if that's more of an exception or more the rule. I really don't know.
It may be the exception, but it's the most visible and the most talked about part of this whole.
Didn't, if anybody else knows besides me, didn't Airbnb post a $1 million loss in the first quarter of this year?
They probably did because nobody wanted to rent when you could bring a deadly disease into the house.
How much can you trust that?
People stop traveling.
All right. To be continued. We've got some pretty varied feedback from the entire community tonight that we need to digest and put into a new draft, I guess. And we will definitely vet through the attorney as well and have him put his stamp on it. Thank you, everybody, for speaking tonight. There's a couple new faces in the crowd that have not been here
all the
before.
work you did on it too.
She's been the most boots on the ground for the whole thing. So
And I love the Airbnb. I use Airbnb. I don't want you guys or anyone to feel singled
I think
out or threatened in any way.
we've all probably used it. I don't know if Dave
We don't want to take it away
has.
from anyone.
You're only a hotel guy.
Been true.
All right, moving on real quick. Update on the Pearl Street sewer. There's a hole in the ground down there. We're waiting for the contractor to get back to us with a concrete plan. The cost of the manhole installation that we were discussing is significantly larger than what was originally quoted. There's a lot more going on underground than he thought at first glance. So we're looking into a couple different options. Still going forward the manhole, putting in some kind of smaller clean out valve for the line there that they could run a snake up the line from there, which would be just kind of a, an 8-inch or a 10-inch cap on the line, or just backfilling as is and moving on. So to be continued as well. Just wanted to give everyone an update that we're not leaving that open because we want to. Update on the cell tower lawsuit. I did talk to Jonathan Bardavid, and there's nothing going on. So still waiting on it to digest through the court system. Speeding on Main Street. I just added that here because someone brought it up. We reached out to the sheriff's department. They did a couple enforcement days out here for inspections and things like that. I'm to the point where I want each of us to write a letter to the sheriff once a week, for a month, to maybe get his attention to take it seriously. Because I have yet to see a sheriff's car pull anybody over on Main Street. And if I almost get hit one more time crossing this crosswalk on the weekend, I don't know what else we could do.
You want to watch it past school buses.
It's crazy. It's like,
It brings me back to my point about, the fork on 301 in Fishkill.
Yep.
I was there with my family and with my niece and nephew yesterday, and people zoom by at 50 miles an hour with two kids trying to cross the road.
On the wrong side of the road.
Yes.
so I'll invite everyone in the audience as well. Write to the sheriff and complain about speeding in Nelsonville. Say it again?
And I lived in Florida for a while, and when you lived in Florida and you came to a crosswalk, you stopped
Pretty much in
both ways and then stuck your foot out.
pretty much in every other state,
Here,
people stop for you
they
at
don't even
crosswalks.
stop.
But here,
They don't even look. They're on their phones, and they start crosswalk, and they just walk.
I stand there with a baby carriage, and the cars just keep speeding past, and then one out of maybe 10 will stop.
So I watched 3 cars the other day go past a stop school bus with the lights on.
Most of the time he's right there in front of the old White House.
Yeah.
And the cars are whizzing by.
So I mean, the comment was made to somebody when they had the enforcement thing. Was it you that told me that it was because the mayor complained that they were out there checking inspections for the day? So maybe you got some inspection tickets this month to take care of, because we need the money, right? New business. First up, and I'm sorry this was your first meeting here. Appointment of our new village clerk, Melissa Harris. Do I have an official resolution that I need to make? Or?
On Airbnbs.
She's apolitical. She does not live in the village.
I left with the cell towers, you're coming in with the.
So officially I appoint Melissa Harris as clerk. Do I need to vote on that? No? This is an appointment. But is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Welcome. It's not always. It's usually not this long, and it's not this. This isn't even contentious. You wait.
And that's the judge, by the way.
Fire protection agreement. This is with the Village of Cold Spring for fire protection for the Village of Nelsonville, which we went through a few months ago, but the draft that we actually approved either got lost in the clerk transition or on the Cold Spring side of things. So we're just going to go through real quickly again if everyone has read it. The cost for this year is $36,646, correct? That's what it has? So that is for fire protection for the Village of Nelsonville, provided by the Village of Cold Spring. We do not have our own fire company. We dissolved them in the 1990s at some point. So we contract out with the Village of Cold Spring because they give us the best bang for the buck, and they're the closest. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
Is there a second? Second. Any questions before? Nope. All those in favor? Aye. Let's see. End of fiscal year treasurer's report.
All right, we started the month out with $347,079.50. We took in $6,023.99, and we expended $20,971.85, leaving us a balance of $332,131.64 for the end of the year.
Any questions for Pauline?
Good job.
He said, good job. Notice the residents to maintain their property. All right, we've gotten a few complaints from people via email and the building inspector in writing, verified, that people are leaving their grass to grow too high and all that stuff. Some of them legitimate, some of them are nitpicking, that kind of thing. So we're putting out a notice in the paper to all residents to please remember to upkeep your property, mow the grass.
Did that go out?
It did. It went in last week, right?
No, it started. It's this week.
This week. All right. So just reminding everybody here that, you know, if you have not only your lawn, but if you have a strip in between the curb and Main Street, please mow that as well.
What if you have a garden or holiday.
You're up in the woods. I think you're all
But I
good.
mean, in general, if people are
Me
trying
too.
to do that. Like, there's a new
No.
one at Phillipstown.
The issues we're discussing, like, I don't want to point any properties out, but the one that was corrected is 295 Main Street, which, you know, is basically a house under construction. They're not living here, and the grass was encroaching over the sidewalk. The weeds were growing, so you couldn't even walk past it. If you're getting to that point, it's time to hire someone. And,
But they also have a wild garden. And I
Say that
told-
again?
They have a wild garden.
okay,
Yeah, and I told them to cut the grass around it so that it looks like a garden.
there's a couple problem parcels, and we deal with it on a yearly basis. The one that we usually have the problem with is doing great this year. Howard. I believe that's it. Open to the floor if anyone hasn't exhausted themselves speaking. I'm
You're looking at me, that's, you better not.
no, I'm not singling you out.
I'll wait for the next meeting.
We're also working on getting something in the paper for a request for proposals to pave Secor Street, Spring, Secor, and Crown, so all the way around. So look for that. Okay. Nothing from the paper?
I just need a picture of the board, because I haven't got one yet.
We need one too. I would have dressed up.
And also the name and get a photo of your new clerk, so.
Absolutely. We can do it after the meeting.
Yeah.
Nothing else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Have a good night, and thank you for coming out for the first back in-person meeting.
Wonderful to see your faces.
See that?
You want a picture now? Or later?
We do it now.
Job, man.